Secretary Rice, as I think you know, since 1979, China's one-child per couple policy, with its heavy reliance on forced abortion, has actually murdered more children than all of the mass killings of Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong. The one-child per couple policy has made brothers and sisters illegal. It is being used today as genocide against the people of Tibet and the Uyghurs, and has resulted in little girls being targeted for extermination and killed by the tens of millions simply because they are little girls. The systematic destruction of those girls is gendercide. As a direct consequence, the imbalance of boys and girls in the People's Republic of China today is so alarming, some put it as high as 100 million missing girls, that one demographer said that by the year 2020, 40 million men will be unable to find wives because they have been aborted, a cruel outcome that will make China a magnet for traffickers. And there's also a book called Barren Branches, which posits as his theory that it could also lead to war. In addition to withholding funds from the UNFPA because of their support for this policy, what are we doing to defend women and girls from this predatory policy? And would you consider raising this issue at the UN Genocide Implementation Body? You know, obviously births or targeting births is part of the UN Genocide Convention and the Human Rights Council. And secondly, this week, I plan on introducing a bill, the International Megan's Law, named after a little girl in my hometown of Hamilton, Megan Kanka, who was brutally murdered by a convicted pedophile who lived next door. Over the last decade, state after state has passed, as we all know, Megan's Laws to notice local neighborhoods, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, schools, and the like, about the existence of that person in their neighborhood. Using FBI databases, the bill would require noticing destination countries when a convicted sex offender or a convicted sex trafficker was about to travel to that country, and would also bar entry into this country of convicted sex offenders and convicted sex traffickers. And I know of your very deep commitment to combating human trafficking and violence against women and violence against children. On that bill, I would ask your personal help in trying to get that enacted into law.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for your continued dedication to these issues and to concern about really the most vulnerable of people in the world. And certainly on China's policies, we have always voiced our concern about those policies. As you say, we have denied funds because of policies of that kind. On the question of where one raises or how one raises it, I'd be happy to have a dialogue with you. I've not really thought it through, but it would be useful to do that. And as you said, we've tried to address many of these issues through our work on human trafficking. And the President's, I think, global human trafficking operation, GTIP, is now renowned for having put this on the agenda of every country in the world. And countries don't like to be designated in Tier 3. And so we are very often able to get responses. We don't always get responses. And when we don't, we've been willing to really expose trafficking procedures and trafficking policies in countries. So I agree. I think it is a modern form of slavery, this trafficking, and we have tried to act accordingly. I have not looked at your bill, Congressman, but of course I will be happy to look.
I deeply appreciate that. You know, the idea emanated from a meeting I had with the tip office from Thailand, at which they were expressing great consternation that our pedophiles fly to Bangkok, abuse their little children, and then fly back, and they never even know they're coming in the door. And it seems to me that if they're noticed, they can put a great big stop sign and prevent their entry, and if they do get in, monitor their activities, and vice versa. We don't want these pedophiles and convicted sex offenders and sex traffickers coming here as well. So it seems to me it's an idea that will help advance this cause significantly.
Thank you.
I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New York, Mr. Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, welcome. For a moment, I'd like to focus your attention on the presidential succession crisis in Lebanon. Support for the Cedar Revolution may be the president's biggest potential win in the Middle East, and right now, that success is just 4 dead men away from disappearing. That's the remaining number of parliamentarians that Syria and Iran and their terrorist proxies need to kill in order to destroy the majority and return Lebanon to its status as a fiefdom. If losing Gaza was a disaster, try losing Lebanon. Our response here has been frankly inadequate, and I'd like to suggest the following steps to be considered urgently. First, America's commitment to Lebanon's sovereignty and independence needs to be reiterated by the President in a specific major address. Damascus and Tehran and the entire Middle East need to hear explicitly that the United States will not accept resumption of foreign domination of Lebanon, that we insist, and mean it, that foreign states refrain from interfering in Lebanon's constitutional process, that we consider the assassination of Lebanese parliamentarians as acts of international aggression, that we will never sacrifice the special tribunal for Lebanon to appease other states, and that we will push for the special tribunal to include all assassinations since Rafiq's Hariri in its purview. If a presidential statement was important for Burma, it is equally important for Lebanon. Second, the President should immediately impose economic and political sanctions against the Syrian regime, specifically President Assad and his family and his coterie of close associates. Their assets in the United States should be frozen, and their travel to this country should be barred. The very same steps should be taken against their proxies in Lebanon. The President has expansive sanctioning powers under U.S. law that are not even close to being exhausted with regard to Syria. Third, the United States needs to raise the profile of this crisis much higher. Security Council resolutions are not enough. A formal international contact group should be established with the explicit mission of protecting Lebanon's sovereignty and independence. Further, I believe the President should appoint a single figure in the United States government to be responsible for managing this crisis. Fourth and last, the House has twice and the Senate once passed resolutions supporting Lebanon and pledging our continued readiness to put our money where our mouth is. Currently, we're getting outbid in Lebanon by two countries whose combined GDP is just a third of our national defense budget. If you believe we need more resources to prevent disaster, Madam Secretary, you have to ask for them. That support is here. Madam Secretary, I know that you and the President have more than enough to handle. Your plate is full, but there's not going to be another chance to save Lebanon. We have to act now. I've summarized these points in a letter that I will give to you, but in the remaining time, I'd like to hear your initial response.
Thank you very much, Congressman. First of all, I think that there are a number of ideas that we have been, you've cited that we've been looking at, and others that may very well be worth doing. So thank you for your letter, and we'll examine it very closely. I'm a very firm believer in the point that Lebanon is really one of the key elements in getting a policy that will promote moderation and be able to resist extremism. And we've tried to be very active in Lebanon. I would say to you that the diplomacy on Lebanon is extremely active right now. I was with my French counterpart just a few weeks ago on this issue, with my British counterpart about it just a couple of days ago. We are working also on the premise that, or on the basis that there should be no effort to make Lebanon in any way set aside constitutional processes that would lead to a president that the United States of America would consider illegitimate in some fashion. Now, the Lebanese are having their discussions, but we know who our allies are in Lebanon, and we're in very close contact with them about what is acceptable to them and what is not. The president, for instance, met with Saad Hariri just, I think, about 10 days ago. So. And Walid Jumblat was just here and met with Mr. Hadley. I was unfortunately out in the Middle East. But we've been very active with the March 14th group, and we're going to stay active with them. We are trying to call attention to the fact that the Syrian and Syrian-backed forces are trying to either intimidate or literally destroy the very people who would be able to bring about a democratic solution in Lebanon. So we're very focused on this issue. Congressman. We are trying as well to make sure that the tribunal is fully funded so that it can go ahead and begin its work. Mr. Brammertz is about to make a report pretty soon. The tribunal needs to be ready to go. As to resources, we requested and received $770 million in the last supplemental. We believe that that is the appropriate amount for now. It includes budget support, it includes security support, and I would just note that if you talk to most Lebanese, when they faced this challenge up in the Palestinian camps against that sort of al-Qaeda lookalike operation, it was really American help in terms of ammunition and support that arrived with unaccustomed speed to help the military to carry out that task. Admiral Fallon was just there, Undersecretary of Defense Eric Edelman was just there, and so we are pressing very hard ahead with our allies in Lebanon, but I'm very much where you are. We need to do as much as we can because this is a crucial moment for Lebanon, and I welcome very much looking at your ideas.
The gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank Secretary of State for all of her hard work. And we watch you on television all over the world. I'm so surprised to see you here today when just a few days ago I saw you overseas. I could not function that way, and I'm just, we're very proud that we have a Secretary of State that seems to have the not only mental but personal, physical strength of Margaret Thatcher, and who was a very
That's
strong,
high praise. Thank you.
a very strong lady, as we all know. At this point, it appears that we've got irreconcilables on both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian situation, as well as we've got voices of moderation and compromise on both sides. It appears from your testimony and from what we've heard today that the voices of moderation and compromise, we are doing our best to back them up, but they are in a very, how do you say, weakened position, and we're trying to strengthen that position. If that's, is that a correct summary?
Yes, I think they're not, I wouldn't say they're in a weak position because I think they really do represent the great majority of the Palestinian population. But the other side, the extremists, are getting very strong support from countries like Iran and to a certain extent Syria.
Well, there are irreconcilables, and I say on both sides
Yes.
of this issue, and one of the issues that I think needs to be addressed before those voices of moderation can actually carry the day is the issue of water. And I think that that's an issue that quite often we miss. And the fact is that I believe that, for example, Israel, I understand, receives a significant amount of its water from the aquifers under the West Bank, which makes them, of course, less willing to compromise on territory because they need the water. And I also understand the Palestinians have a significant water consumption problem in that they don't consume as much water as ordinary people in different places consume because they just don't have it. Would you think that perhaps some concepts like the Red Sea to Dead Sea project, if we could promise them support for that, which would dramatically increase the water supply in that part of the world, could play a role in finding peace?
Well, you are right that water has been an issue. As a matter of fact, it is named as one of the final status issues because it is just so important to both sides. They are talking about that in the Omert Abbas channel, and there may be opportunities to help with various technical measures, with various economic projects. Desalinization has helped a lot.
Right.
And as you know, the Israelis are probably the world leaders in the ability to do desalinization. And so there probably is a solution to it, but you're right, Congressman, there has to be a solution because that is one of the issues that continues to divide.
Well, I'm glad to hear that that's on your radar screen because I believe that once we really put some effort in it, we can prove some goodwill to both sides in that issue and underscore the moderates. About the vote that we had here a week ago or so, 2 weeks ago, on the Armenian question that's officially has enraged the Turks. I think that people should understand, and I'd like your opinion on this, is just that the Turks, that vote in no way was an anti-Turkish vote, and I think I speak for my colleagues here. That vote was a human rights vote and a recognition of a violation of human rights. But the Turks should understand, and the Kurds should understand, that that in no way would mean that we would tolerate attacks by Kurdish guerrillas on Turkish soldiers and Turkish civilians. Quite frankly, the Kurds should understand that we will support the Turks' right to retaliate if, indeed, Kurdish terrorists go across the border and murder Turkish citizens and soldiers. Is that our position?
Well, clearly we have said the PKK is a terrorist organization, and we've clearly said that the Turks should not have to sustain attacks from havens across that border in Iraq. We have cautioned that retaliation of cross-border raids and the like, cross-border operations, would have a destabilizing effect, and that has been the course of our conversation. And we've encouraged everyone to work together toward a solution that does deal with the terrorist problem,
Right.
but doesn't destabilize northern Iraq. If I may, though, Congressman, on the Armenian resolution, and I recognize that it was a difficult vote for some who supported the administration position on this, because I know it's difficult. There was a reason that we felt very strongly that this resolution should not go forward. This is a very delicate time with Turkey. It is a time when it is going through a major transformation internally. We have extremely important strategic interests with the Turks. This is something that was a horrible event in the mass killings that took place, but at the time of the Ottoman Empire. These are not the Ottomans.
Right.
And what we have tried to do instead is to get the Turks and the Armenians to work together to look to their future. I had the Armenian Prime Minister in yesterday, and I said to him, you have to understand that Americans, who are always accused of being too forward-looking, not looking back enough, really do believe that it's important that Armenia and Turkey move forward. And I encouraged him to reach out to the Turks at the civil society level and the like. But I continue to believe that the passage of such a resolution of the Armenian genocide resolution would severely harm our relationships with Turkey.
The reason why...
Gentleman's time has
Yes.
expired.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Falamavega.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, Madam Secretary, I want to commend you and Assistant Secretary Chris Hill for your work in the six-party talks with North Korea, trying to prevent the dangers of a nuclear confrontation in the Korean Peninsula. And you succeeded in bringing the North Koreans to negotiate, and some credit also should be given to the People's Republic of China and its leaders in doing this. According to media reports, Madam Secretary, you have been very persistent within the administration to give diplomacy and true statesmanship a chance to work its way through resolving some of the most difficult issues facing our nation and the world today. And again, I commend you for doing this. I've learned from experience, Madam Secretary, that I need to present you my questions so that in a way that you can then choose how you may want to respond. My first question is that Vice President Cheney in his recent statements made comments to the effect that there will be very serious consequences if Iran continues on its present course to develop a nuclear weapon, which Iran flatly denies. We're struggling now with the two wars we're engaged in now in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our military force structure is stretched thin. It seems to me that this is the same similar rhetoric that led us to war against Saddam Hussein. My question on this particular phase is, will the administration seek new authority from the Congress to wage war against Iran? Or does the administration feel it doesn't need permission from Congress to do this? Or will it be just to shoot first and then ask questions later? Next question is, I note that in your statement that the need for more democracy, more freedom, and more tolerance among countries in the Middle East. Note with interest that we're about to provide an arms sales, a $13 billion arms sales to Egypt, and I suspect probably a multi-billion-dollar arms sale also to Saudi Arabia. Israel being the only true democracy in the Middle East, I can see how we can justify, accept a $30 billion arms deal also with Israel. My point here is that Russia and China are also selling arms to Iran, that's my understanding. And I'm taking that the administration's position that this is not creating a regional arms race. And I have to respectfully disagree that we are going to create an arms race if our government intends to provide arms to these various countries that are non-democratic in the Middle East. Third question is
I want to caution my friend that if he wants an answer from the Secretary during the course of the hearing, he'd better stop now, because I don't think we can go beyond and ask more questions, or you can ask more questions and then the responses will be in writing. But I don't wish to see my colleague use up his 5 minutes and then the Secretary take additional time to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, can you respond to those questions?
Thank you. First on Iran, the President has been very clear that while he doesn't take any of his options off the table, he's committed to a diplomatic course on Iran. And I think that that is where we are focused. I would just say that when one speaks of serious consequences, there also have to be serious consequences in diplomacy. I'm not one who believes that diplomacy in the absence of disincentives for states really works. And so in this case, we are trying to impose consequences on the Iranians for their refusal to adhere to 2 Security Council resolutions. We have sanctioned a number of entities. We've encouraged states not to put investment credits into Iran. Hank Paulson has talked about the investment risk of dealing with Iran as well as the reputational risk. And so we are trying to marry our diplomatic efforts with consequences if Iran does not accede. As to the package of arms sales that we are pursuing, and the details of many of these are still being negotiated, Congressman, and so I would not jump to any conclusions about specific numbers in some cases. But the issue here is a security environment in the Gulf and in the Middle East proper that we cannot allow to turn against our strategic allies in the region. It is the case that the Iranians have significantly increased their own defense capabilities. It's not an issue of causing an arms race. It's an issue of being able to respond to what are serious security challenges and potential threats to our long-term allies. And it's nothing new, in fact. We've had these security relationships in the Gulf for decades. So this is to help our allies to deal with emerging security threats. It does not mean that we don't continue to have very candid discussions about democracy, about reform. I just recently had those discussions again in Egypt. But it does mean that we have to be attentive to not creating a security environment in which the Iranians have the upper hand.
Gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Pence.
Welcome, Madam Secretary. Good to see you here before the committee. Last time we spoke, I was in a pickup truck in Indiana.
Yes.
And I will always be more comfortable there than here. But thank you for coming. Thank you for your leadership. And tangentially, since the administration gets no credit for good news in Iraq, let me call to your attention today's Associated Press story that reads, October is on course to record the second consecutive decline in U.S. military and Iraqi civilian deaths in a row. And American commanders say they know why. The U.S. troop increase and an Iraqi groundswell against al-Qaeda and Shiite militia extremists, close quote, is the cause. Thank you for your diplomatic work on the ground in Iraq. Thank you for the progress that it's making, reported or unreported. I want to speak to you about Annapolis and get your sense of things. I admire your statement earlier that the objective is a secure and stable peace in the region. The President said that was preconditioned on the, quote, non-negotiable demands of human dignity. As an unapologetic champion of Israel, let me say I'm very interested to know, going into Annapolis, what the substance of that means. Specifically, you may recall, I think it was a week after September the 11th, when the word of the creation of a Palestinian state first was rumored in the newspapers. We met shortly thereafter on Capitol Hill to speak about it in your prior role. What was a rumor a week after 9/11 has been reported to be the stated objective of administration policy. I heard it driving in this morning, that the goal of Annapolis is to create a Palestinian state. I'm troubled by that. Shouldn't the goal first and foremost be a secure, stable, and permanent Israel as a Jewish state? And then a just settlement for other people in the region. Israel is our ally. America was instrumental in her rebirth in 1948. And I would just ask you very sincerely, because I think I know your heart on this. I think I know the President's heart. I don't question that at all. But do we put ourselves tactically at a disadvantage when we state that the objective of these negotiations is the establishment of a Palestinian state, as opposed to saying the objective is the cessation of violence, the objective is that all parties would recognize the right of each party to exist, the objective is a humane solution, and then allow that to drive. If that leads us to the creation of a Palestinian state, then so be it. But I'd love to know what your definition of success is. Can you speak specifically to those reported accounts that the objective of this conference is the creation of a Palestinian state, and what your mentality and the President's mentality going into this conference is?
Thank you. Well, the first, Congressman, let me just note, you mentioned September 11th, and I think that after September 11th, one way that the United States and the Israeli leadership actually got closer was in our joint belief that terrorism was a significant, indeed existential threat, not just to Israel, but also to the United States. And the President made very clear early on that you could not, with the one hand, condemn al-Qaeda and on the other hand, hug Hamas. And it was the President who said, in effect, that there could be no such thing as a freedom fighter in that context. This was that a Palestinian state could not be born of terror. It is why we rejected the leadership of Yasser Arafat. It is why the President then called for a democratic leadership in the Palestinian territories to lead their people to statehood. And you now have in the Palestinian territories a democratic leadership, and one that we believe is really trying to fight terror. They don't have all the capability that they need. But one of the things that was very encouraging for me when I was in the region recently is there isn't much argument that these are people who want to do the right thing. And so I think the circumstances have changed very much. I would say that the conference will try to lay a foundation for the parties to come to the establishment of a Palestinian state. Perhaps it was put best by Ariel Sharon when he talked about, in his Herzliya speech, the need to divide the land and the need to make painful compromises because the Palestinian state was in Israel's interest. I think that what people have come to recognize is that the way that you will ultimately secure a democratic Jewish state called Israel is to have, living side by side in peace, a Palestinian democratic state. And so the goal is the establishment of a Palestinian state, not one born of terror, as I think it would have been in earlier times, not one that is unable to carry out its security responsibilities, not one that is not democratic and delivering for its people. But I would defend the statement that there needs to be the establishment of a Palestinian state in order for there to be, in the long run, a stable and secure Jewish state. And I think that was the reason that the father of the settlement movement, Ariel Sharon, moved from the concept of a greater Israel to the concept of dividing the land and having two states, one for the Palestinian people and one for the Israeli people.
The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you again,
Good to see you.
Secretary. As we know, this is about the Middle East, but the war on terror, I think, includes other areas, and Africa, as you know, is one of the areas we're concerned about. And I have three quick questions about three countries involved in the whole war on terror, so to speak. The government of South Sudan suspended its participation with the government of Sudan because of the obstacles that the government of Sudan, Bashir's government, has put in as it relates to the comprehensive peace agreement. As you know, Senator Danforth, and I think is one of President Bush's greatest achievements, at least in Africa, with the comprehensive peace accord. And so I wonder whether the administration is urging the government of Sudan to implement the CPA. Secondly, about the UN peacekeepers and AU, Bashir has still been putting in roadblocks to bring in peacekeepers into Darfur, and I wonder if you could comment on that very quickly. Secondly, the Ethiopia-Eritrean situation in Badame, the demarcation of the borders had not been accepted by Ethiopia, our big ally in Africa, and I wonder if our administration is urging Ethiopia to accept the agreement that they said they would accept from The Hague as relates to the border dispute between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Finally, the question of the 193 people that were killed. I had legislation that finally passed this House and this committee and the House, support from the chairman and the ranking member, the chairman anyway. Are we putting pressure on our friends Ethiopia to do the right thing? And finally, Somalia, we have the Ethiopians in Somalia. Transitional federal government just arrested the head of the United States, the United Nations Food Program, just a few days ago. The areas are continuing to deteriorate. What are we doing to try to include the ICU, the Islamic Courts Union, with the transitional federal government in Somalia so that we can bring a peace to that region?
Thank you, Congressman Payne. And let me begin with Southern Sudan. Yes, I'm personally very concerned about the CPA, which of course the United States took the lead in getting negotiated. It ended a civil war that had cost tens of millions of lives. It's something that we really must make work. We've requested, you might notice, in the supplemental $70 million for Southern Sudan because we believe that we need to make a more active effort on some of the reconstruction efforts in Southern Sudan and to help strengthen that government. We are very concerned about the behavior of the North, about Khartoum in dealing with Southern Sudan, about obviously their behavior in Darfur and Eastern Sudan, but their behavior on the CPA has also not been good. And I have just recently received a report from Andrew Natsios, who has been spending some time in Sudan, also working on Juba. And I will be looking at what policy we can undertake, because this is something that cannot be lost. The CPA, with all due need to deal with Darfur, we don't want the Southern Sudan piece of this to unravel. On Eritrea, Ethiopia, yes, we do encourage and urge the acceptance of the UN effort there. It has been difficult to talk to Eritrea, frankly. We've had trouble getting them to talk to us. And I sent our Assistant Secretary to talk with Mr. Isaias, and he didn't see her. So while we are saying to the Ethiopians that certain things need to be done, it would be very helpful if the Eritreans would show a little bit more interest in what the United States has to say. In terms of Ethiopia and the current situation in Somalia, yes, we are encouraging, and Ethiopia is encouraging the transitional administration there, government there, to reach out as broadly as possible to the clans, to members of the ICU who are not engaged in terrorism. It's a complicated situation. As you know, there are some people who are in Somalia that we really believe have strong al-Qaeda ties, and obviously they need to be kept as far away from any further government there. But yes, we are working very closely. I don't think there's any doubt that the Ethiopians don't want to stay in Somalia. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to work with the African Union to get that security force, the peacekeeping force, ready for Somalia. The AU has its challenges because they're trying simultaneously to raise forces for Sudan, for Somalia, to keep efforts going in Cote d'Ivoire and in other places. So it's a challenge, but we are very attentive to what needs to be done in Somalia.
Gentleman from
Thank you
South
very much.
Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. I appreciate your extraordinary successful efforts of promoting democracy, opportunity, and peace around the world. Last month was in Iraq. I saw tremendous progress being made, but all of us are concerned, what is the State Department doing to reduce corruption in Iraq?
Thank you. And first of all, we fully acknowledge that there is a serious corruption issue in Iraq. Not all of it is a new issue. I would just note that some of these problems have been endemic. Even under dictatorship, there were problems with corruption. But it is now our responsibility to press the Iraqi government as hard as possible to deal with corruption. We have spent about almost $47 million on anti-corruption programs and measures. We've supported their own anti-corruption panel. We've supported judges who carry out these corruption trials. One of the problems that we have is we very much have to protect the identity of people who will come forward and report corruption. Because as you might imagine, in these circumstances, it could be dangerous for people to report corruption. And if we want to keep a steady stream of people who are going to report it, we're going to have to show that we don't play fast and loose with the information that they give us, that in fact we protect them and protect the information. So we're working very hard on it. We have not been shy about saying publicly and saying to the Iraqis that corruption is a pervasive and serious problem and that we intend to help them deal with it. But it is something that we are very concerned about.
And also, I have the perspective, my oldest son served for you in Iraq. I'm very proud of his service there. What do you see as the most recent achievements in terms of infrastructure development for the people of Iraq?
Yes. I think the most recent is that, just let me say, electricity is finally up in Iraq, and that is a good sign. But I think what has happened, Congressman, is that we have found a formula that puts the reconstruction efforts more at the local level, where it can get to the people. Some might say we, the United States of America, should have understood this one. If you're sitting in Cincinnati or you're sitting in Baltimore, you would look not to Washington, D.C. to deliver certain kinds of projects, but to local government. And we've been really working hard on local responses to infrastructure and reconstruction. It has helped also, it's an iterative process, it has helped us to get local people engaged in the security. And so in a place like Anbar, when we were out in Anbar, one of the interesting parts of that whole discussion was that the Anbari sheikhs were clearly quite proud of what they had done in terms of helping to expel al-Qaeda and being our ally, but they were hammering their central government about getting resources out to Anbar so that they can deliver for their people. And that kind of development of local responsible government that close to the people can provide infrastructure support, I think is extremely important. We've provided clean water for Iraqis. We've provided a lot of the infrastructure that will lead to more energy production. But probably the real breakthrough, and it goes also to how the American military is operating in classic counterinsurgency mode, where you have to expel the bad people, but you also have to work with healthy forces in the region. And we've developed with the military 10 embedded PRTs, we call them provincial reconstruction teams, where our diplomats and USAID people and civilian experts are literally embedded with brigade command teams and can both clear areas and then help in infrastructure development.
Thank you so much for your service, and I'm so grateful for your backing up our troops and the cooperative and partnership efforts on behalf of our country. Thank you very much.
And thank you for the service you sent to.
Thank you.
Before recognizing my next colleague, I ask security to remove 2 people from the audience who are disrupting the proceedings. And I want to caution all members of the audience, I will not allow the holding up of signs or making hand signals. So the 2 individuals will now be removed.
It's the gentleman right in front of the camera if you can't find him, officer.
That man needs to be removed without delay. And the woman across the aisle. Yes. Gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, reports in the paper that Iraq has agreed to award $1.1 billion in contracts to Iranian and Chinese companies to build a pair of enormous power plants is very disconcerting. The Iraqi electricity minister said this. To me, the expansion of ties between Iraq and Iran makes no sense at all at a time when young Americans are dying in Iraq and we're spending billions and billions of dollars. I'm wondering if you could tell us about this and what have we said to the Iraqis about this. Obviously, any expansion of Iranian interest is a concern for the military, a concern for the United States. And while we're clashing with Iran on nuclear issues and Iranian support for armed groups in Iraq, to me this makes no sense at all. It's almost as if the Iraqi officials are really sticking it to us.
Thank you, Congressman. On Iran, we do not believe that the expansion of Iranian ties in this way is a good thing, and we've made that clear. I would note Iran is an Iraqi neighbor. They've had economic interest in Iraq going back a very long time, but the Iraqi government itself has talked about the influences of Iran in the region, and so we've raised it with them. In terms of China, I don't think it's quite the same situation. This is a country that I expect will invest in many, many different parts of the world and has any number of economic relationships with our friends or allies, in fact, with us. But on Iran, we have raised the issue. It's an independent government with its independent decision-making, but I can't disagree with you.
Thank you. As we've discussed many times before, and you know I was the author of the Syria Accountability Act, we know that Israel recently bombed inside of Syria. I'm wondering if you could shed any light on that. I'm very concerned about the recent Syrian military buildup. I'd like your comments on that. Have we expressed to Russia our concern over military sales to Syria? And in light of Syria's negative behavior, why has the administration not taken further action to sanction the Syrian regime as outlined in the Syria Accountability Act?
Well, I want to thank you again, Congressman, for the Syrian Accountability Act, which we have used, and we are often looking for the right timing to do certain things. I think earlier We were talking about the upcoming elections in Lebanon and the ability to send signals there. So I assure you we continue to believe that that's an important part of our toolbox. As to Syrian arms transfers from Russia, yes, I did raise it. And in fact, I said to the Russians who went out of their way to say, well, there was nothing illegal, that not everything that is legal is smart. And that when you're dealing with an area of the world that is this complex and where the Syrians are engaged in the behavior that they are, this is a destabilizing policy, and we will continue to make that point. As to the reports that have been in the newspapers, I can't comment. I can only say that we have continued to be concerned about proliferation from a number of countries, and we are going to continue to try to make sure that the President's pledge that weapons will not, these terrible weapons will not end up in the hands of the most terrible people can be met.
Can I ask you about Israel's qualitative military edge? I'm very concerned, obviously, that Israel keep its qualitative military edge, and there's some concern about the sale to Saudi Arabia. Can you assure us that that will not affect Israel's qualitative military edge?
We are absolutely committed to Israel's qualitative military edge. Defense Minister Barak was just here, and we had discussions with him. We have also noted that the Israelis have said that they understand why these arms sales need to be made, but we're absolutely attentive to it and have no intention of allowing it to erode.
Madam Secretary, all reports indicate that Hezbollah has restocked and rearmed, that weapons are coming in through Syria from Iran. Why are we not insisting that that Hezbollah arms to Hezbollah be stopped? This, to me, is a very, very serious provocation, and obviously could prompt another conflict in the region.
Well, we are insisting that that border be better manned and guarded, and technical assistance. The Germans are trying to help the Lebanese with technical measures to prevent arms transfers across that border. We are looking, Congressman, at what UN resolutions might have been violated, not just in regards to 1701, but resolutions of 1747 that have to do with Iran. And so we're looking very hard at how to do this. I think it goes without saying that the Senora government is our best ally in this regard, but that they have their plates a bit full these days in what they're trying to do. And part of this is to be measured in what we ask them to do at any particular given point in time. They were brave enough to go to the UN and ask for the tribunal. They were brave enough through the Lebanese army to fight those terrorists in those Palestinian camps. They're trying to face down Hezbollah. They're trying to face down those who are intimidating their legislators. So it is in part a judgment about how we deal with them in requiring certain things of them. But I want you to be sure that we agree with your assessment that it's a very serious matter and we're trying to get them help.
Thank you, Madam
From
Secretary.
Arkansas, Mr. Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When Ambassador Crocker was here not too long ago, I asked him about a concern that I've had really for quite a while about the quality of the information that we're trying to put out, the equivalent of Voice of America in the past. And I know in traveling with the region, you really get mixed results when you visit with the leaders of the country. Some of it seems to be very, very good. Some of it seems to be, as they would term, silly or inappropriate or whatever. I mean, very, very mixed reviews. I guess my frustration is a little bit, we're dealing with some problems that are very, very difficult. That seems like that's one that we could fix. And in visiting with Ambassador Crocker when he was testifying, he shared concern that we were still maybe lacking a little bit in that area. Could you comment on that?
Yes, I think first of all, we have gone, as you know, to great lengths to reorganize under Karen Hughes public diplomacy to make it possible for our ambassadors around the world to respond. And we're working very hard to try to make sure that our messages get out. Now, in Iraq, Frankly, we've not, we're doing better, but it's been insufficient. And one of the things that Ambassador Crocker asked for was a really first-rate Arabic speaker as his public affairs officer who can go on television and in good Arabic defend our policies, because one of the problems that we have, it's really not so much Iraqi TV, it's that everybody in the Middle East watches Al Arabiya or Al Jazeera, and if you're not a part of that mix, you're not a part of the dialogue. And so he has requested that. I think we've identified the right person for him. We're going to beef up that operation because when we have breakthroughs like we have in Anbar, it's important that the Iraqi people know, and it's important that the region knows. And one of the things that I've been encouraged by is that the Iraqis, who are new at being politicians in some ways, are showing a willingness to get out more, go out among the population, have that covered by television. It's an extremely important part of the effort, but we've responded to Ambassador Crocker's desire to have a more active public affairs operation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Delahunt.
Yes, Madam Secretary, you've made reference to Syria and the concerns that that you've expressed about Syria and their behavior in the region. The President, at one point in time, cited their legacy of misery and torture. I'd like to ask you a specific question about a Canadian citizen by the name of Mahia Ara. I know that you're obviously familiar with our treaty obligations and federal statutes against torture. The record of Syria on torture is expressed in the State Department's annual country reports, can only be described as horrific. The report references 38 varieties of torture that they utilize, particularly when they are in the process of securing information. My question is, given their record, why did the United States rendict Mahia Ara, a Canadian citizen, over his objections to Syria without informing the Canadian government?
Well, this is a case in which I think there were some concerns expressed, and some of them were frankly appropriate, not about our desire to make somebody go to a place where we thought they might be tortured. That's not the point. We absolutely try to ensure that that will not happen. But our communication with the Canadian government about this was by no means perfect. In fact, it was quite imperfect. Our efforts to untangle what happened here took some time. I think we and the Canadians do not have exactly the same understanding of what is possible in the future for Mr. Arar in terms of travel and the like. But we have told the Canadian government that we did not think that this was handled particularly well in terms of our own relationship, and that we will try to do better in the future.
You're aware of the fact that he was tortured for a year.
I am aware of claims that were made, Congressman.
Are you aware of the
I'm aware of claims that were...
commission?
I'm aware of the Canadian
Inquiry Commission?
Of course, yes.
Right, by Justice O'Connor.
I'm aware of the inquiry, and as I said, we do not think that this case was handled as it should have been. We do absolutely not wish to transfer anyone to any place in which they might be tortured.
Did you rely on diplomatic assurances from Syria that he would not be tortured?
Congressman, I will get you a full accounting of this because, frankly, at this point, my own memory of some of the details of this case has faded a bit, but let me get back to you.
I'll be looking forward to that communication,
I'll be very
Madam
happy to get it to
Secretary.
you.
Thank you.
Gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, what an honor to have you in front of the committee today. I agree with your assessment in the Middle East about Iran. In my personal opinion, the most dangerous thing in the entire region is a nuclear Iran. And I know that they have a lot of ties into Iraq, especially with Shia militants who are trying to halt a lot of the progress there. In a recent speech to the Washington Institute for Nuclear Near East Policy, President Cheney stated, quote, "The Iranian regime needs to know that if it stays on present course, the international community is prepared to impose serious consequences," end quote. When Congressman Hamilton was here talking about the Iraqi report, I asked him the question, if we knew for a fact that Iran had led attacks on American soldiers and had been involved in killing American soldiers, I asked him, isn't that an act of war? Which he basically said, well, yes, Congressman, it is, but what are you willing to do about it? And I guess that's my question today, Madam Secretary. I know we have sanctions, and I know that options have been talked about, and I know that we are taking this very seriously because it scares me to death. Are our sanctions working? What are we doing to increase our sanctions? What sanctions are the best? And if sanctions don't work, kind of tell me what's the next option, please.
Thank you. Well, we believe that an enhanced diplomatic effort that really does now draw everybody who in the international financial system into a posture that really will not allow Iran easy access to the international financial system can have a quite important effect. I would just note that there have been many banks that have left Iran that refuse to take their assets. They are losing investment. They need investment in their various sectors, including in their oil and gas sector. And so we're working very hard diplomatically. As I said, we've not been limited to what happens in the UN Security Council. We've also ourselves sanctioned a number of entities, and we're going to continue to look at ways that we can do that because that gives us additional leverage. I would just note, too, that inside Iraq, the President has told our military to be very active against their agents who are engaged in activities that harm our people or that might harm innocent Iraqis. Their support for militias, particularly in the south. And some of these stories that you see are because we see these links, so that some of the people who've been picked up, fairly high-ranking Iranians, are important. It's important to let Iran know, as Ambassador Crocker told the Iranian ambassador, that their people aren't going to be safe anywhere in Iraq if they keep up this kind of activity. Now, occasionally there'll be some people who have no further intelligence value and can be simply thrown out of the country. But we are making an active effort, and we get good value from learning about their activities, from picking up some of these operatives. And I think while I've emphasized the sanctions piece and the UN track for the nuclear piece, I don't want to leave the impression that we aren't very actively pursuing them when we catch them engaged in some of these hostile activities.
Is there truly a sense of urgency in implementing stronger sanctions that are going to be effective, Madam Secretary?
There is a sense of urgency. We have one reason that we've continued to pursue the track outside of the UN Security Council is that the Security Council track, to the degree that we can keep that moving in unanimity, it's a good thing, because the Iranians then can't claim that it is just the United States that is sanctioning them, but rather that it's Russia and China. And I know for a fact that after the last Security Council resolution, they were stunned that it was 15-0. It set off a debate inside of Iran with some voices saying, we're being isolated by the policies of President Ahmadinejad. We want to keep that debate and that clash going on inside of Iran. And so it's important to keep this track in the UN moving in unanimity if we can. But it's also important for the United States to have its own policies that deny Iran access to the international financial system. My colleague Hank Paulson and I work extremely closely together on these designations, and it is important, as has been the discussion now in the European Union, that others consider what further steps they can do. And in this regard, I would just note that the French and the British have been particularly helpful.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Watson.
Madam Secretary, welcome, and thank you for the time you're spending. We've been in Iraq occupying that country for 4.5 years, and we keep asking the Iraqis to step up and reach a political compromise while our troops are present on their soil. And our troops have served with courage and valiancy, but military heroism cannot deliver political success, and continuing to sacrifice that heroism with no promise to political success is, to me, a waste of American resources and lives. So my question is, what are your expectations for the current government in Iraq to step up to the plate and create a truly viable government that can successfully engage the Sunnis, the Shias, and the Kurdish elements? And let me attach my second question, and you can respond with the rest of the time. I just got a clipping from the press, and I think this was in the Sacramento Press, that the Turkish warplanes and helicopter gunships attacked positions of Kurdish rebels during its rugged border with Iraq on Wednesday, as Turkey's military stepped up to its anti-rebel operations. So we now see that Turkey is ramping up its efforts to dislodge Kurdish rebels. And how serious do you see that? And will it mean that Turkey will enter into the fray in Iraq? And what is the department doing to stave off?
Thank you, Congresswoman. First of all, let me take the Turkey piece of this first. We've been very actively engaged, particularly for quite a long time on this, but we've stepped up our activities after the recent attack of the PKK that killed 17 Turkish soldiers. As I said, I was personally involved in this and talking to Prime Minister Erdogan. We don't see that any effort across that border by the Turks is going to help with the situation. These people live in very remote parts of Kurdistan, but we do see that the Iraqis have an obligation to do everything that they can to prevent these attacks from taking place. I can't comment about the specific report that you have because I don't know of this particular, this alleged attack. I do know that there
I'll share it with you.
Thank you. There's activity back and forth across that border, unfortunately, quite a lot, and very often is there. But we have said to the Turks that a major, some kind of incursion into Iraq is only going to cause further instability. And what we've encouraged is joint work by the Turks, the Iraqis, the Kurds, to deal with the PKK, all of whom, by the way, consider the PKK to be a terrorist organization. So this is not the Iraqis saying to the Turks, well, you don't have a problem. The Iraqis agree that there's a problem. It's a question of how to deal with these PKK terrorists, and we're working very actively on that. The Iraqis were, the Turkish foreign minister was in Iraq yesterday. The Iraqis will send a senior delegation to Turkey. They have agreed that there's some actions that should be taken, so that is a very active front for us. In terms of our own presence in Iraq, which of course is under a Security Council resolution and is under request by the legitimate government of Iraq that the multinational forces be there, including American forces, we agree, I would agree with you completely, this can't be won by military means alone. What the military has been able to do is to create a somewhat improved security environment in which the Iraqis can turn to political matters. And we've frankly not been very pleased. We've been disappointed with the national reconciliation efforts at the national level, the passage of legislation like debathification laws or the oil law, and we continue to press that. But I think it would be a mistake to believe that nothing is going on politically in the country because they've been unable to pass these laws. First of all, they have passed a lot of laws, including just recently a pension law that will allow all Iraqis, regardless to who they worked for, under what circumstance they worked, unless they're the worst of war criminals, to receive a pension. That is reaching out to a population that is disaffected. They have improved their budget execution to the point that money, which is mostly oil revenue, by the way, so they don't have an oil distribution law, but the money is starting to get to the provinces so that people in Ramadi or people in Fallujah can spend money on their populations. The local governance that is coming up in the country is, to me, an extremely important sign of political development in the country. So I would not by any means underestimate the importance of getting the national reconciliation to where we want, but it would be a mistake for any of us to ignore the significant local developments that are emerging and the relationship between the central government and those local developments. There's some 60,000 Iraqi citizens in and around Baghdad and the security region in the Sunni lands who have volunteered for community protection as a part, and many of them as a part of the security services. So a lot is happening politically in this country, and I think it's worth recognizing that while continuing to press very hard on the Iraqi government to pass the right laws.
The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary, for joining us today. We're very grateful to have you. Of late, we've made very good military progress in Iraq as a result of the new strategy led by General Petraeus, but clearly the situation is very complex and dangerous and very fragile. My following comments are not meant in any way to diminish your exhaustive efforts of diplomacy in the Middle East. But I wonder, given the security gains, if now may be an opportunity to create a new spirit of diplomacy in the region, a diplomatic surge, if you will, that engages responsible international stakeholders, particularly Arab states, to help undergird peace and stability in Iraq, particularly given the recent gains. We tend to have a lot of very good and helpful conversations, as we've seen today, about the complexities of situations in individual countries. But to create, again, a spirit in which the ideal of a collective security arrangement becomes the new governing paradigm, particularly given the opportunity coming up in Istanbul with the ministerial meeting of the ministers, I would just encourage and like to hear your thoughts on any potential developments that meeting could produce in terms of creating this new spirit of diplomacy in the region.
Thank you very much, and I'm very glad that you mentioned this Neighbors Conference. We've had one, of course, in Sharm el-Sheikh, and now we'll have one in Istanbul, because I think it could play exactly the role that you have suggested. It will take some work. It is not a region that is actually accustomed to thinking in collective political and security terms. It's, with us, been completely bilateral for decades. There are two institutions that we're trying to use. The Gulf Cooperation Council plus Egypt and Jordan has been one that has been much more active really for about the last year. It started at the UNGA a year ago and has been very active to try to bring about that kind of collective mentality about security in the region. And we talk in that group not just about the Palestinian-Israeli issue, not just about Iraq, but about Lebanon, about Somalia, about Sudan. It's a place where we and our Arab allies, frankly, can have a common security vision of what we need to achieve. There's also a Gulf Cooperation Security Dialogue that we have. None of these are yet at the stage of institutionalization that they probably need to be. But as you undoubtedly recognize and suggested in your comments, one has to kind of lay the groundwork and start people thinking in those terms, and it becomes more institutionalized over time. One of the things that we're doing that Ban Ki-moon has agreed to do, the Secretary General of the UN, is to put an office in Baghdad that would be a permanent structure, almost permanent secretariat for this Neighbors Conference, so that it can have a kind of ongoing character, recurring character, rather than just being a meeting here and a meeting there. So those are some of the things that we're doing. We do have a common view of many of these issues, particularly given the threat from Iran, and I think we need to make the best of it to get a kind of more institutionalized response.
That's an excellent point as well. The threat of the geopolitical ambitions of Iran is forcing, in some ways, a new paradigm of thinking collectively in the region. So yes. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Conham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being with us again. I really appreciated your comments about focusing on the division within the power structure in Iran and how we can take advantage of that situation. I think that obviously is key to part of our overall strategy, also coordinating international sanctions. It has to be part of this diplomatic surge in the area. I am, though, concerned about part of our strategy that appears to be counterproductive. And that is with regard to some of the diplomatic preconditions that have been set for having engagement with Iran. I'm also concerned about the escalating rhetoric that the President has used, talking about World War III and other kind of inflammatory rhetoric. I'm also concerned about the press reports about the request for the $88 million for the B-2 bombers to be retrofitted to carry the MOP bomb designed for deep penetration in the earth, and most experts believe that's something that would be potentially used in Iran. I guess the administration and you have talked about diplomacy as our first course of action, but I am concerned about the rhetoric, about the limits that harm those diplomatic efforts, and I'd like you to talk about how, in the context of that, we can really, again, push this diplomatic surge and not get to that slippery slope.
Well, I've said to my colleagues on many times that we do not want to be in a situation in which we're choosing among unpalatable alternatives vis-a-vis Iran. And that means that we have to have the strongest possible diplomatic effort. But a strong diplomatic effort doesn't mean just sitting and talking with the Iranians. It really means showing that there are diplomatic and indeed financial consequences if Iran does not adhere to what are conditions of the international community. Congressman, I think, as you know, it's not the United States that has simply said that they need to suspend their enrichment and reprocessing. It is the UN Security Council that has said that. And there's a reason for that, and that is that it's very good to have talks with the Iranians if they're going to go someplace, if they're going to be used as a smokescreen for Iran to continue improving its capability to enrich and ultimately to have the technologies that lead to a nuclear weapon. That's not a proposition to which we ought to subscribe. And I think we've won that argument with our allies, even with countries like China. And that's why you're getting Security Council resolutions that demand that they stop enriching and reprocessing. Suspend. We've only said suspend. It's really, frankly, not that tough a condition. They could do it tomorrow. And I've said that if they're prepared to suspend, we'll change 28 years of American policy and sit down and we can talk about whatever they want to talk about. So I said when I was in Moscow, I think the question isn't why won't we talk to Tehran, it's why won't Tehran talk to us? And I suspect that we do need to continue, as you suggested, to press forward in ways that will get the attention of those who want a better way. And there are, I do believe, differences inside Iran. You see them in even their newspapers where people criticize some of the more aggressive policies of Ahmadinejad. We are on a diplomatic track. The President doesn't take his options off the table, but the President's been very clear that he believes this can be resolved diplomatically. But frankly, the international community's got get a lot tougher if it's going to get resolved diplomatically. That's the Iranians are not a state, I think, that will change its behavior just through talking to them. There do need to be disincentives to their continued activities, and that's what we're trying to do with these Security Council resolutions, as well as the kind of designations that we sometimes do.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis. Turn on your mic, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Rice, thank you for your outstanding and dedicated service to this nation. You have served with distinction and honor. We are privileged to have you testify before us today. I too have particular concern about the Iranian regime's role as a destabilizing factor in the Middle East. Recent bipartisan polls conducted this summer in Iran show that 80% of Iranians favor the Iranian regime offering full international nuclear inspections and a guarantee not to develop or possess nuclear weapons in return for outside aid. Do you believe that there is a direct relationship between the state of freedom and democracy in Iran and the regime's quest to acquire nuclear weapons and the long-term success of our global war on terrorism? If so, would you further agree that it would behoove the United States to support a transition to democracy in Iran, much like President Bush has talked about? Are we doing anything to support the pro-democracy labor and student movements, as well as supporting women's and minority rights in Iran? If so, what are we doing? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, as you suggest, the Iranian people deserve the same freedoms that people anywhere deserve. The President's been very clear that that is the non-negotiable demand of human dignity. And we, at the same time that we concentrate on changing the regime's behavior concerning its nuclear weapons program or terrorism, we also try to support forces that want to be for change in Iran. We have had democracy support funds. I know that there is some controversy about them, but I can tell you that because of the way that we handle them, we think that we are helping people who wish to carry out democracy programs through non-governmental organizations. And we don't expect people like that to want to be in direct relationship with the U.S. government for all kinds of reasons, but we certainly can support non-governmental organizations here and other places that are working with Iranians to push forward for their freedom. We also need to very, very actively continue to speak out for the people who want a free Iran. If we can get messages through to the Iranian people that we respect their great culture, we respect them as people. We don't want the United States, the people of the United States and the people of Iran to be isolated from one another. We should be friends. And so it's the policies of the regime that are preventing that from happening. And we've even said that we don't want to deny Iran civil nuclear power. The President is a major proponent of civil nuclear power around the world as a way to deal with energy needs, to deal with clean energy supply so that we can be good environmental stewards. What we don't want Iran to have is a nuclear weapons technology. And so we've supported efforts that would give them civil nuclear technology, but without the proliferation risk of the fuel cycle. And it's sometimes hard to get that message through the Iranian government filter, because I think the Iranian government wants their people to believe that the United States is trying to deny them technology. So those are some of the things that we're doing. I was really pleased to welcome a group of Iranian artists here during the summer in a completely non-political event, but that showed young Iranian artists under 40 that we value them. The American wrestling team went to Iran. They were wildly cheered where they went. Somehow we're going to break through that Iranian filter that is trying to convince their people that the United States of America is their enemy. We are not. Thank you.
Before recognizing my next colleague, I want to mention to all of us, after the questioning by the gentleman from Texas, we shall take a very brief break to cast our votes, and then immediately we'll resume. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to place my statement into the record.
Without objection.
Welcome, Madam Secretary. I have a district in Texas, and it's in Houston, so energy is a big issue. But the Government Accountability Office released a report last month about some challenges we face with the capacity in Iraqi ministries, partisan influence, militia infiltration, corruption, and poor security. The GAO recommended the State Department, in consultation with the Iraqi government, complete an overhaul of integrated strategy for U.S. capacity development efforts, and that Congress should consider conditioning future appropriations on the completion of such a strategy. Do you agree with those recommendations, or what steps do you think we should take so it would be the carrot and the stick both, knowing some of the problems that's widely reported?
Yes. Well, Congressman, we have a strategy to try to support the development of reliable ministries in Iraq. We have a strategy to try to help them train proper civil servants, both at the regional level and at the national level. I would just note that this is not an easy or short-term task, because this is a country that effectively ministries didn't matter under Saddam Hussein. They were nothing but instruments of the power of the dictator, and now you're asking them to do all of the things that I think we sometimes take for granted in governing, to construct budgets and to be able to get the money out to the field, to have civil servants who are not going to be subject to corruption. And by the way, as difficult a circumstance as Iraq is, I think we know that we've had to fight corruption around the world. It's not just in Iraq that we're fighting corruption in ministries. I would note some of the efforts the World Bank is making in that regard. So I'm tempted to say, I've become convinced that governing is not a natural act, that this is something that has to be taught and developed over time. But we have a strategy for working with them. We have ministry assistance teams that work out of the embassy to go in, both to help them develop their own capacity and to actually help them resolve problems. You know, sir, since you're from an energy state, that one of the big problems is to get all of the various elements to work together so that investment can be made, so that production can be carried out, so that transportation. They've had really quite fragmented, a little piece of the problem in the Ministry of Oil and Gas, a little piece of the problem in the Ministry of Transportation. They've just put together a task force to try to do better on that. We're trying multiple ways to help them be more capable. Now, the one pledge we have insisted on from the Maliki government is that these ministries are going to be staffed by people who are not there for political favoritism. They're there for competence. And we've had some good results and some not good results. But I assure you that on that one, we are absolutely candid with the Maliki government that we don't expect, and frankly, in some of the early incarnations, it was patronage. Somebody got put in a ministry because they were a friend of somebody who was in one of the parties. And so we are working really hard with them on the professionalization of the civil service and the ministries. So I think we do have a strategy. We are putting a good deal, almost all of the resources we're requesting these days are either for the increase of local or national capability. It's not now the big reconstruction projects that you were accustomed to when we did the initial help, but that's the kind of thing that we're trying to do with our money. It's frankly hard, but I think we have a strategy to do it.
Okay. Do you think we ought to condition future appropriations for some type of strategy to success in, smaller steps so we can see that?
Well, I think that I think conditioning appropriations doesn't give us the kind of flexibility we need. I will tell you that I tell the Iraqis all the time that one of the ways that I can continue to request this kind of support from Congress is, first of all, that they live up to the obligations they've made to us, but also that they spend their own money. Yeah. The Iraqis are in an unusual position. They do have resources. They don't have enough resources. I still think it is enormously important that we spend resources in that country, but it ought to be partnering with them so that, for instance, the work that we're doing in Anbar, they have made the more than $2 billion commitment to the Anbaris for reconstruction assistance and housing and the like. I feel much sounder coming to you to say, all right, then U.S. resources can be X amount if the Iraqis are putting that money in.
Thank you very much. The committee stands in recess. resume with Mr. Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, there must be some days that being provost at Stanford looks good in the rearview mirror. Thank you very much for your public service to our nation. In September of 2002, I was invited to a White House briefing on Iraq, and you were one of our briefers in your capacity as National Security Advisor. Mr. Tenet was to have been the other briefer. He was unavailable. He was, his deputy stood in his stead. I will not get into the substance of the information that we discussed, but I think the policy views which were discussed there are fair game, and we should, in fact, very important, and we should discuss them. You brief a lot of members of Congress. There's no reason why you would remember this particular one. We exchanged some pleasantries about Tyrone Willingham's wonderful season at Notre Dame, and we also discussed your dissertation, I believe, on the Czech Army and the Red Army just a little bit. And then we got into a serious discussion about the data and proper interpretation. And let me just say that, in my view, the CIA briefer presented data and then laid out best case scenario, worst case scenario, medium scenario. And in that briefing, you consistently argued for the worst case scenario interpretation of the data. And one of your principal arguments was that the American intelligence community had been late or insufficiently pessimistic with respect to Russia back after World War II. That there was a prediction about when they would have the atomic bomb, and they had the bomb sooner. There's a prediction about when they would have the hydrogen bomb. They had the hydrogen bomb sooner. And that was one of your principal arguments about why we should have a first strike doctrine, if you will, vis-a-vis Iraq because of their potential weapons of mass destruction. We went on to other things, and then toward the end of the meeting, as we were breaking up, I circled back in a colloquy. My comment to you was that your rationale for a first strike doctrine against Iraq would have justified an American first strike in 1946 against Russia. And I want to be very careful in this, but I believe your answer after several exchanges was, in view of the subsequent subjugation of Central and Eastern Europe, perhaps that's something we should have done. I have three questions. Do you continue to believe that we won the Cold War and we did not get into a hot war? Do you continue to believe that perhaps a hot war in 1946 might have been the right thing to do with respect to Russia? Secondly, in terms of our current situation, given that the war in Iraq is now the second longest war in American history and the second most expensive in American history, given what you knew in 2002, do you continue to believe that a first strike in Iraq was the right thing to do? And third and most importantly, for this committee's consideration and for this Congress's consideration, what other nations or organizations are out there that you and the administration you represent might consider within the circle of potential first strike so that we and others can consider alternatives to hot wars, can consider alternatives to war, and can consider a range of options other than the first strike doctrine that you were laying out at the time?
Well, thank
the
you very much.
Secretary will have 40 seconds to answer, and the rest will be in writing.
All right, I'll do it very quickly. First of all, I probably said, although I don't remember specifically, I'm an historian, and I do believe that there were those who said that at the time, that given subsequent events in Russia, we should have considered extension of the war. I think it is well known that there were people who believed that. I don't remember expressing that as my personal view. Secondly, as to Iraq, let's remember that, in fact, and I guess I'm just the concept of first strike here, I think, is perhaps a little out of place in Iraq, given that we were in a state at that time with Iraq of a suspension of hostilities, but not an end to the war. We had been at war with Iraq in 1991. They were continuing to shoot at our aircraft in no-fly zones. We had, in fact, had to attack their facilities in 1998 because they expelled inspectors, and so we were in a state of hostilities with Iraq. To the question of whether or not, after 17 Security Council resolutions and the continued behavior of Saddam Hussein, it was right to consider a policy to finally deal with him, I believe that that was the right policy. As to other states, I think speculation about what we might do under what circumstances isn't really appropriate. I do think that the President has made very clear that he doesn't take any of his options off the table whenever American security interests are threatened. But obviously, as we did with Iraq, where 12 years of diplomacy was pursued, I think we always want to try to have a diplomatic course. We are doing that now in a number of circumstances. We've talked a lot about Iran. We obviously, in North Korea, are pursuing a diplomatic path with our five-party colleagues in the six-party talks. We're making some progress, but frankly, on North Korea, we are also using what I would call the teeth of diplomacy, not just the carrots of diplomacy.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tancredo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along those lines, Madam Secretary, the teeth in the policy with regard to North Korea, I would really like to know specifically what those teeth might be, and especially in light of the fact that the let's see, on September the 6th, the Israelis reportedly conducted an airstrike in Syria to take out a facility that had been that was developing, and that was developing with the aid of the North Koreans. The facility was reportedly one that was being prepared for the purpose of using nuclear weapons, or there was some nuclear weapon activity going on there. We don't know, of course, the specifics. In light of that, do you not think that it was premature to release the $25 million to the North Koreans, and especially when we have such a history with them where they can agree to a variety of things, only, of course, to get what they want from the West and from whomever will help them with both military and domestic aid, and then back off or back away, or and do in this case what they appear to be doing, proliferating nuclear weaponry. What do you think that we should do as a result of that? Do you think it was premature to release the $25 million?
Well, I really can't comment about the press reports concerning action that might have been taken by the Israelis. I can't comment on that. I can say that the President has made very clear that North Korean or Syrian or anybody else's proliferation is of deep concern to the United States, and that we've had policies to try and prevent that proliferation, including the Proliferation Security Initiative, the taking down of the AQCON network, et cetera. As to the teeth that we've used with North Korea, of course, we have a Security Council resolution, Chapter 7, China, Russia in agreement. That is probably the toughest resolution that's ever been taken against any state, given after the nuclear tests that North Korea conducted. Shortly after that, we were able to re-enter the six-party talks, but the six-party framework agreement that was agreed on February 13th is one in which it is very clear that the United States only delivers on certain obligations when the North Koreans have delivered on theirs. And the first phase, was for the shutdown of the Yongbyon nuclear reactor verifiably. That took place, which is why the release of a small amount of energy supply made sense. Now, for the North Koreans to receive any further benefits, they have to carry through with the next phase obligations, which include the disabling of their nuclear reactor and other nuclear programs associated with it, and to have a full accounting of their nuclear programs, and we include proliferation activities, which we take as seriously as indigenous activities.
So if, in fact, it turns out to be the case that they did provide weaponry or some form of nuclear materials to Syria, then that would put them in violation of the agreement.
The agreement is that they will fully disclose and that they will then, we will be able to act on anything that they disclose. I am, again, not going to speak to the specific issue here, but we've been very clear that the North Koreans are neither supposed to be engaged in nuclear activities at home. In other words, we're shutting down those nuclear activities, and we don't expect them to be engaged in proliferation activities. We believe that the best place to handle such concerns is in the six-party talks, where we have the power not just of the United States, but of China, of South Korea. I would note that South Korea, you asked about teeth, the South Koreans withheld at one point $300 million in assistance to North Korea. That gives us a certain power to get results. But if we are going to deal with North Korean behavior, frankly, we need to shut down their program. We need to know what they did with the plutonium that they made, and we need to destroy the product of their weapons program that goes back 30 years. So the United States is finally in a position to perhaps do something about the North Korean program, and I think we want to keep that capability.
Mr. Chairman, it would be appropriate if I ask for unanimous consent to submit other questions in writing?
Yes.
And I do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from Washington, Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, you have an extraordinarily difficult job, and I thank you for your service to our country. I want to focus on Iran. I know some others have asked some questions about that, and I may have missed a couple of them. And I completely agree with the arguments that have been made by some that economic pressure is the key on the nuclear issue, and want to offer this committee's strongest support to put as much pressure as possible economically. But in terms of Iran's other interests, and the real question is, what is our diplomatic strategy for containing Iran? And just a couple pieces of context. Iran certainly has regional interests, but they also fear us. With clear reason, we've made it clear that we'd, at a minimum, rather have a different regime there, and here we are with substantial military presence on both of their borders, and that makes it hard to sort of get them to stop the violent actions that they're doing to destabilize us in Iraq, because the more stable and secure that our troops are there and in Afghanistan, without question, the greater threat that Iran will feel. The second piece of context is there's clearly an opportunity here with the Sunni states, who also fear Iran, to work with them on the strategy of containment. But given that first challenge in particular, trying to get Iran to tone down their efforts to directly attack us in Iraq, there's considerable evidence they're doing some of the same things in Afghanistan. What is our diplomatic strategy, understanding there's a huge military component to this as well? But just in your area, what is our diplomatic strategy for trying to contain Iran in Lebanon, with Israel and Iraq and elsewhere?
Thank you. Well, we're working very closely with allies in all of those cases. In Lebanon, we work very closely with the French. We work very closely with the Saudis, who have a great interest in a sovereign Lebanon that can defend itself. And we work with the Gulf Cooperation Council states. As I said, this forum of the Gulf Cooperation Council has given us a place to pursue common interest in Lebanon, in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. By the way, one of the goals has to be to take away troubled waters in which Iran can play. To the degree that you make it harder for Iran to see benefit or to see places in which they can make gains, it's easier to manage in the Iranian challenge. We also, as a part of the diplomatic strategy, have authorized Ryan Crocker from time to time. I think he's met twice now with his counterpart. But he delivers a pretty strong message, which is that we don't have, in effect, hostile policies toward Iran. Iran has hostile policies toward us. And
Iran doesn't see it that way.
No, I understand.
And there's reasons why they might not see it
I understand, but
right.
I think that they would find that if they were not threatening our forces in Iraq, if they were not arming Shia militia in the south, if they were not engaged in arming Hezbollah to try and to destabilize Lebanon, if they were not involved with the Hamas in the Gaza, that they would find a United States that was more than prepared to look at common interests.
Is there any level on which that conversation, I know there have been some preliminary conversations with Iran, that message has been communicated to them? Is there any possibility of that being better received than it is right now?
Well, it's a good question, Congressman. I would hope that if Iran can suspend its nuclear enrichment capabilities, which are dangerous because enrichment and reprocessing is not a scientific problem. It's an engineering problem. You have to learn to do it for long periods of time in order to be able to enrich material to a level where you can build a nuclear weapon. If they will stop trying to do that, I've said we can have the discussion about everything. It doesn't just have to be about the nuclear program. I think that is the best circumstance in which we could have those discussions.
Thank you very much.
Before recognizing my next colleague, and to complete the record, let me state that while the administration at this moment is not in favor of a dialogue with Iran, some of us are. And the reason we are incapable of engaging in a dialogue with Iran is because the Iranian government refuses to issue a visa for purposes of a dialogue to any member of Congress. I have been attempting for years, with the assistance of first Kofi Annan and now Ban Ki-moon, to obtain a visa, and so far all these attempts have been unsuccessful. So the record must show that while the administration does not now favor a dialogue with Iran, those of us who do are incapable of engaging in a dialogue with Iran because Iran refuses to have a dialogue with us. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall.
I thank the chairman. Madam Secretary, welcome. It's good to see you again. I think you're doing a fantastic job. I fully support also your diplomatic surge, if you will. I think it's time we focus on that. I wish you all the success in the upcoming regional meeting in Istanbul. I hope it's a very substantive meeting. I know sometimes these meetings are somewhat lofty, and I hope you're able to get something done in the region. I want to focus on an issue that we've talked a lot about diplomacy, we've talked a lot about Iran, but I want to focus on something that hasn't been raised. Iran is working towards nuclear capability, but there is another Muslim state that already has it, that in my view poses a potential threat to our interests, and that is Pakistan. Through the AQ-CON network, they achieved that capability. Pakistan, after all, has given us people like Ramzi Youssef, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. They continue to train and recruit terrorists, Al-Qaeda specifically, in their country. The Saudis continue to finance this operation. Former Prime Minister Bhutto was almost assassinated, and many people were killed, as you know. President Musharraf is literally a bullet away from Pakistan being turned over to these extremist forces. This is yet another challenge that I know you have on your plate, but it is a real concern of mine of that country being one bullet away, being turned over to the extremists, and then they have that capability in the region. And I just wanted to, in light of the recent killings in Pakistan, I just wanted to get your comments on the situation there.
Thank you. Well, Pakistan has its challenges. I think everybody can see that. This is a country that was really at the brink of extremism, had close relations with Taliban, and one of the few countries in the world to actually recognize the Taliban government in Afghanistan during that period of time. And we effectively had no relationship with Pakistan. And I think one of the lessons is that we effectively didn't maintain our relationship with Pakistan after the Soviet Union left Afghanistan. And we paid for that. We paid for it in not having the contacts. We paid for it in the rise of extremism. We have a good partner in President Musharraf. We are encouraging him to broaden his contacts with moderates, other moderates who can be a Pakistani bulwark against extremism, which is why we have been supportive of his efforts with Mrs. Bhutto, and hope that there will be an effort of all moderates to be prepared for fully democratic elections to take place in the parliament in December, so that Pakistan can take that next step toward a more stable democratic environment. It's obviously very difficult. One of the problems that we have tried to help them with is on, for instance, education, through supporting their own programs to reform madrasas and to reform some of the very basics where this extremism is growing. We've tried to help with economic development. We've tried to help with economic development in the federally administered tribal regions, while saying to them that they have to fight up there against the extremists. So it is a broad-scale program to try to help Pakistan, but I think we have to recognize that it was at a very, very dangerous point a few years ago. It is still really challenged. But the point that I would take from the past is that when we did not maintain those ties, when we cut off Pakistan, we got a worse outcome. And so our deep engagement with Pakistan at this time and with moderate forces there, I think, is well worth doing.
The gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee.
Madam Secretary, let me quickly thank you for your service and quickly as well acknowledge our fellow Americans who are suffering in California and offer our deepest concern. And I raise that because the headlines today talk about $2.4 billion for the wars. And Afghanistan, I think, is a distinctive war, and I won't question you on that at this time. But I think what I'd like to ask very quickly is, when will our soldiers come home from Iraq, based upon legislation that I'm writing that really chronicles the success of the military? That's my first question. The second question is, whenever Vice President Cheney, and this is my opinion, is engaged in foreign policy, it's dangerous. His comments this week were dangerous. And I'd like your response to how we build the civilian resistance that you mentioned in Iran, and whether or not the administration will participate in a unilateral attack on Iran. My other question is simply this issue of the fraud, waste, and abuse in the Iraqi security contracts. I would ask the State Department to consider putting a 5-year penalty on denying those contractors the ability to contract with the State Department, and high penalties, because I believe it's the worst offense. With that, let me yield to the distinguished Secretary for her response.
Thank you very much, Congressman Jackson-Lee. And let me also, I'm a Californian, and watching with dread what is happening to our fellow Californians, my fellow Californians.
Would you pardon me just to add, congratulations for Annapolis, and I'd like to know whether members of Congress could have observer status at Annapolis, and I'd like to engage you on that issue. Thank you.
Let's talk about that. I would be happy to talk about that. Let me just, on the issue of troops in Iraq, I think the President has made it clear that General Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker believe that if we continue to make some of the progress that we have, that we're going to start to see some American forces come home, and that's something we all look forward to. Our military is performing very brilliantly there. We are engaged with them on the diplomatic and civilian side, actually embedded with them in places where I think some of that progress is coming, like in the Sunni areas of Anbar, which were thought to be lost just a year ago, and are now one of the areas of the most progress in Iraq. And I think what that shows us is that engaging local people in their own fight is absolutely essential to the success of getting to a more stable and ultimately democratic Iraq. And our policies have been very much aimed at that.
Iran.
And on Iran, well, we are pursuing a diplomatic course. The President believes in that. I sit with the Vice President. He believes in pursuing this diplomatic course. And the key is that the Iranians do have to know that the international community is going to be tough to prevent an unpalatable decision later on about an Iran armed with a nuclear weapon. And when we say consequences, we do mean that we also, while the President doesn't take any options off the table, we do have economic ways that we can go after this, and we're doing precisely that.
If you would stay the course in Pakistan for fair elections, supporting former Prime Minister Bhutto and Musharraf, we cannot abandon Pakistan, and I hope the administration will pursue that policy.
Thank you. I'm in complete agreement with you, Congresswoman. Thank you.
Madam Secretary, I know I speak for every member of this committee in expressing our deep appreciation to you. We all stand in awe of the depth and breadth of your knowledge, and we look forward to your next appearance. This hearing is adjourned.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee.